PeerTAC sponsored. Thank you for joining the PeerTAC sponsored workshop, Diagnostic Overshadowing, presented by Robbie Lettieri and Melissa Wettengel. Sorry, thank you. At the inaugural Supervision Summit, I am Mariam Hussamuddin, and I will be your moderator for this session. For technical support during the session, please send a chat to Eileen Crosby. Your microphones will be muted and camera might be on or off for background noises and distractions. Want to keep them minimal. We encourage you to use the chat box to introduce yourself or ask questions. Choose everyone in the chat for comments that you want visible to all attendees. This session is being recorded, and a link to the recording presentation slide and any handouts associated with this session will be posted on the PeerTAC website within the next 30 days. If you lose internet connection or accidentally leave the Zoom room, choose the link next to the title of this workshop in your program to rejoin. If you are seeking CE credits for this session, you cannot use a phone link. You will need to sign in. 10 minutes are reserved at the end of the session to ask questions. You will receive instructions by email from the Alliance for Rights and Recovery for completing the workshop evaluation. We encourage you to complete this evaluation to let us know how we did. If you are seeking CE credits for your participation, you will need to return the evaluation within 48 hours. With that, PeerTAC would like to thank Robbie Lettieri and Melissa Wettengel. To learn more about the presenters with complete bios, visit the Supervision Summit and Leadership Forum page on the PeerTAC website and click their photo. And now, please join me in welcoming Robbie Lettieri and Melissa Wettengel.
Thank you, Mariam, and hello, everyone. I'm Melissa, and I'm here with Robbie.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're not
and
sick.
Robbie, you want to do introductions first?
Sure, yeah. So before we get started with the training, we kind of just want to take a gauge on and see who's in the room. So if you want to either go into the chat box and just put your name, title, your organization, or if you want to say, oh my gosh, technology is not my friend today. I hit the sidebar and I got the little pen thing, and now I'm dragging a green highlighter. Okay. You want to put if you are a supervisor and also a trained peer. If you are a supervisor but you're not a peer. If you are a peer but not a supervisor just yet, or none of the above. I see Cassandra put 1, Melanie put 3. I don't know if it's just me, but I lost the slide on my screen.
Is it back now?
Yes, there it is.
Okay. I was trying to look at the chat, but I won't do that then.
Thank you. Yeah. Amanda has 1. Trish, supervisor, not a peer. Malika is a peer and a supervisor. Dara is a supervisor and a peer. Suzanne is a supervisor. Sue is a supervisor and a peer. All right, awesome. So we have a nice mix in the room today. So thank you all so much for being here. So we are going to talk about, some of the things that we have been going over throughout the entire presentation, looking at the functions of supervision when it comes to the peer workforce. And then we are also going to talk about what not to do in terms of diagnostic overshadowing. And when we talk about what is diagnostic overshadowing, you might be like, WTF? Don't worry, we will go over that and dive into it at length. So we're also going to have some vignettes towards the end and look at some different cases and try to brainstorm, what is the best course of action to do when we are encountering a situation such as the ones that are going to be described. And we're going to have some time for questions at the end. So I hope you'll have a great time, and I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Robbie. So my name is Melissa Wettengel. I'm with Hands Across Long Island right now. I serve as the CEO here, and I'm so happy to be here, particularly with Robbie. When I started in this field, a conference like this, I think would have been unthinkable. It's really a testament to Amanda Sake at the Office of Mental Health and Rita Cronice and the team at PeerTAC, and really all of you for showing up late on a Friday afternoon to stick with this conversation. I mean, the peers have always had our conferences, and sometimes at interdisciplinary conferences, there'd be a peer session, but sometimes it felt like we were preaching to the choir. So to have such a, as we can see in the chat, such a nice group of people with different backgrounds here is really wonderful. Even though I have no illusions that a few of you here are probably because you followed Robbie, because that was a really incredible keynote. Thank you, Robbie. But I just also want to say I don't consider myself a guru. I'm really honored to be in the company of all the presenters here at this presentation. But my background, just want to let you know a little bit so you kind of understand the direction that I'm coming from here. I have been supervising for a number of years. I've supervised peers in a few different settings, crisis respite and street outreach and hospital settings and a few others. I'm an advocate. My background is in public health, or specifically community health. So kind of how we can build on the strengths of communities and fight stigma and disparities. And that's really become focused in peer services. And collaboratively over the last few years down here on Long Island, we've started the Peer Supervision Learning Collaborative and the Long Island Peer Specialist Community of Practice, so we could really all come together and figure these things out. I am also a trained peer specialist and a peer myself. My own life have had starts, stops, and twists and turns, and peer support has been really just instrumental in helping me reframe and reclaim my life. So this is personal for me. And finally, I'm an administrator. So in my role at HALI, or Hands Across Long Island, I also am familiar with reporting to funders and boards and having to make sure we get the right outcomes for programs and watching costs and managing liability and all that. So I guess what that all adds up to is I'm often confused and I do make mistakes. But I'm committed to getting better, because I really think that supervision is the future of this workforce, and thus the future of our communities really hinge on quality supervision. So again, thanks. And I'm going to try and share all of that today with Robbie's help. So we wanted to first just harken back to the first keynote. I hope some of you got a chance to see it with Jonathan Edwards, where he went over the 5 critical functions of supervision: administration, support, educative supervision, advocating, and evaluating. And I just really love the way this is becoming best practice and permeating our field, and more people are seeing this. What we're kind of going to be focusing on today is number 2. How do we provide support without that kind of veering into something more clinical or deficits based? Robbie, you want to maybe talk about this one?
Sure thing. All right, so please feel free to put in the chat box as we're going through. We're going to be asking some questions throughout this, and we also want to foster some engagement. So if you want to, I would like to say if you want to unmute, go for it. But being that we have over 100 people, I don't think it would be wise if we all unmuted and tried to talk at once. So if we want to use the chat box, that would be perfect. But what do you think? Do peers need more support than other employees? I see Caitlin put, I wouldn't say more support, but a different kind of support. See, Jean said no. Depends on the individual. Second, Caitlin. I think it changes by the day. Okay, so we have some various responses. Thank you. And so, yeah, not necessarily. Peers are individuals the same as anybody else, and the goal is always to create a safe space and to create and foster a supportive and non-judgmental environment for all employees. So yes, just like anyone else, there might be days when someone needs a little bit extra support, but it's not because that they're a peer that they need that additional support, that you have like this burden of supervising a peer. All right, who determines how much and what kind of support to provide? Again, feel free to drop your answers in the chat box. We do with the support of management. All employees should be supported, the individual. It's collaborative. I say how much depends on the supervisor, but what kind is based on the supervisee. Ooh, I like that. Have a mutual conversation, the individual being supervised. I think it should be determined by the peer and supervisor, co-created. Yep, I love that. I'm seeing a lot of collaboration between both. Perfect. All right, so yeah, our idea for this was that we want to allow peers to take the lead on asking for support. I feel like there's a lot of times, and even with myself within the field, when a supervisor, I felt like a supervisor was like, "Oh, Robbie, like, hey, do you want me to do this, or do you need some help doing that?" Or they would tell me X, Y, and Z, and it was almost like repetitive because I knew this, and it was almost like I know that they weren't intentionally trying to be discriminatory, but I felt like they were looking at me as if I was a child that needed to be explained what the color blue and green were. And so, we want to allow individuals to really take that step forward and say, hey, I need some support with this, and be able to explicitly ask you what exactly they might need. All right. Should peers receive clinical supervision? No, we see from Laura. Thank you, Laura. No, no, no. Hard no with a period. No, no. Awesome. Yes, no, is because peers are not clinicians. There is, one of the best practices or recommended practices is having co-supervision. So maybe if you have a LCSW or an LMHC who will be supervising peers, also have another supervisor that might have their own peer experience and their own peer training and their own peer certifications. Having that dual perspective really helps to enhance the service, and it gives the individual operating in a peer role even more support. I'm not trying to talk down to clinicians. I see the need, the demand, and I see the beauty of clinicians, but I think peers need to receive peer supervision because they offer a very specific role that is very different from clinical roles. All right.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's where we're going to ask you to take a little bit of a left turn with us and explore this phenomenon of diagnostic overshadowing. So it's really a term that has nothing to do with supervision per se. It's something that comes up in medical care. The definition is the attribution of symptoms to an existing diagnosis rather than a potential comorbid condition. So what does that mean? It's what happens in the research, and many of us may have experienced this ourselves, is if we go to the doctor with some kind of physical health care challenge, it can be attributed to something having to do with our mental health, to anxiety, or maybe we're not listened to. And at HALI, it was something a few people at our recovery center were talking about. We ended up doing some research on it, and we did a few focus groups, and we ended up doing a project where we allowed some people to tell their stories about different experiences in physical health so that we could try and address one of the many disparities that are our community faces, along with poverty, higher levels of poverty and unemployment, and homelessness. We also are dying 25 years earlier than the rest of the population, and we call this a structural stigma. It's not the same thing as stigma we often hear about is it's okay to have a mental health challenge, you should go get treatment, right? Like this is really about disparities between for people who have a diagnosis. So I'm going to keep this in the slides. I don't think we're going to go over this in detail for the sake of time, but just as an example, a woman went to see her gastroenterologist with nausea and stomach pain. She was basically told that she would have to learn to live with it. It was in her head. Those weren't the words used. It was called functional abdominal pain syndrome. Eventually, they ended up going back to a different doctor, and there was a very real bacterial overgrowth that was overlooked. It was overshadowed by the mental health diagnosis. And there's a very real impact of that. She didn't trust her doctors, and people don't get care. So this really has an impact ultimately on levels of chronic disease and on lifespan for people with psychiatric diagnoses. I promise we're going to bring this back to supervision, but we really just wanted to make sure that everyone had a sense of what we were talking about here. So HALI ended up doing a project called Overshadowed: Stories of Stigma in the Healthcare System. And we were lucky enough to partner with Lucy Weiner, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker. You may know her from her work Unlocked. She's also the filmmaker who did Kings Park: Stories from an American Mental Institution. If you haven't seen that film, highly recommend it. Mariam, I don't even know if you could maybe put in the chat, the link is kingsparkmovie.com. And I recommend everybody check that film out, kingsparkmovie.com. And we were lucky enough that Lucy came to HALI and she filmed some people telling their stories. And we're going to share one of the clips with you here, and you may recognize this guy. I'm just going to pause there because that video is a lot. It can be upsetting. So, Mariam, I don't know if there's anything in the chat that we should pause on, or if we should just keep going.
There are no questions, just a lot of conversations and agreements to the fact that they're triggers and, you know, having poor care and being misdiagnosed and things of that nature. So you
Okay,
can
thank you.
continue. And if it would be okay, the people that have their camera, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera off, I would appreciate it to just, you know, avoid the distraction until the presenters are ready to have open forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to Angel and of course to Robbie who were part of that. So what does this have to do with supervision, right? And why are we sharing that? So I really love that we're right after Robbie, because one of the points Robbie was making is to not forget our humanity and that we are whole humans. And just as a psychiatric diagnosis can overshadow our experiences in medical care, thing does happen in supervision. And when we look at larger scale disparities like employment and disability and socioeconomic status, it's really just as critical and it's just as important. So I'm gonna let Robbie, sorry. I'm gonna I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Sorry. Okay, there we are. Bear with me. Can we see that?
I can.
Nope.
Okay, bear with me. I'll get it back.
And audience, please feel free, write your comments and your questions in the chat. We will absolutely get to them. Thank you so much.
Robbie, we're good? You can see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm gonna let Robbie talk a little bit about some of the risks when we kind of blur these lines.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, and thank you all. So I see Michelle's comment in the chat box, and I think it kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to say. So Michelle put, so little consent and communication, so horrific. So from Angel's story, you know, Angel was saying how she almost was placed in a psych facility rather than getting necessary medical care. And that stood out for me because I was part of that too, talking about myself, but when I hear it happen to someone else too, it's like, what? And that happens so frequently in peer roles too, when the supervisor is thinking that a peer is being symptomatic, or that they need to counsel them, or they need to de-escalate that whatever situation might be happening, but they're just an individual doing the job, and maybe the supervisor's perspective might be a little bit skewed, so that communication and that dignity and that honor really need to come into play. And so does that communication, right? In case there are any supervisors here who might have had an experience like that in the past, where you're supervising a peer supporter and you're like, oh, I think they're acting a little bit symptomatic today. As soon as you have that thought, why don't you just ask that individual, hey, how are you doing? Talk to them, start the dialogue, get it out in the air and just allow it to flow naturally. And then this way that if there's anything going on, you can confirm it, or you can deny it. And you can take it from that individual, from their perspective, without convoluting it with our own preconceived notions. So, all right, looking at the slide now, supervisors, we're going to look at, what happens and then some kind of results that might happen from this. So initially, a supervisor may be less inclined to hold a peer standard of job, to hold peer to standards of job. And the result of that is that for the peer, there's a missed opportunity. Performance eval is necessary and for professional development. Sorry, I gotta move these boxes around. Alrighty, when there's blurred lines because of diagnoses or diagnostic overshadowing, supervisor's perspective on the peer may begin to shift, and their views may be based on a perceived diagnosis or perceived symptoms. It's not definitive, it's again perceived. And so what will the result of that be? From an organizational perspective, the outcomes suffer. There's a loss of a focus on the role and the responsibilities to the program, because all of this attention, all of this time is being given to stigmatizing and discriminating against the staff for being an individual who might have been given a diagnosis in the past. All right, and the last one, supervision sessions may overemphasize peers' personal life. Okay, in the chat box, how many individuals have had that experience where supervision tends to take on more of a personal probing? At times, yes. Okay, I'm seeing a few yeses. So I'm happy that it's not like an overwhelmingly more coming in, which I spoke too soon. But when that happens, I think it's important for the peer in the dynamic to blatantly say, hey, I'm sorry, this is work time, this is work supervision. I would like to focus on my job. I have a few concerns, I need some feedback on a few things. Peers, it's really important that we are coming to supervision with our own agenda, with our own tasks that we need to address. And so that we are still in that driver's seat, even in supervision. Then the supervisor is there to be the supporter. And granted, the supervisor might likely have their own idea, their own agenda items as well, but again, meet each other collaboratively. And so if supervision sessions tend to be overemphasizing the peer's personal life, from a workforce perspective, we can lose people to other careers. This triggers burnout, this triggers tokenism, this just, I was gonna do another gesture that I'm not gonna do, but it has to do with the hands. It's just like peace, forgetting strengths and unique contributions of peers cause them to be undervalued and isolated, which in return will cause high rates of staff turnover. So again, we need to be treating the peers the same as we would any other employee, and that is with respect, with dignity, and seeing them for what they are and for what they're bringing to the table.
Thanks, Robbie. So I loved Peggy Swarbrick's keynote this morning, and I chose Peggy's workshop as well about workplace wellness. So this is slightly a joke because I'm not great with it. I don't set a great example for self-care often, and I'm really working on trying to create a better work wellness culture at our own organization. Sometimes the conversations about self-care that we all have, and the point here is we're saying they're not just for peers, they really should be for everybody in the organization, right? Sometimes they do start to feel like, well, I know I'm supposed to be getting up and walking every hour, and I know I'm supposed to be pausing to breathe, and I should probably take a bubble bath tonight, right? But sometimes it starts to feel like just another thing to do. So it is important for supervisors to be having those conversations with peers on their team, but we're all doing it together, right? Because supervisors burn out as well. This is something for all of us to do. So just as an example here, a peer supervisor is overheard saying, we have to be careful, the peers may relapse without warning. And I have heard statements to this effect. So what consideration might be used to counter this supervisor's misconception? A, have peers agree to individual relapse prevention plans during the onboarding process. B, raise any concerns about relapse directly with the peer before or during supervision. C, trust peers to be responsible for their own wellness and to share information that relates to their role and responsibilities only. D, ask permission to communicate with the peers treatment team regarding any concerns. Robbie, will you check the chat?
Sorry.
What do people think?
Yeah, I'm looking through right now. We're seeing mostly C's.
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Yay. Okay. So we got it. All right. See, our animation worked. All right. Okay, so now we're gonna go to a section where we have two different supervision situations that we made up. So we're gonna go over these together, and then we're gonna decide together what the supervisor should do. Kind of, we're keeping these really complex things in mind. We're trying to really be supportive of peers and of our employees, but at the same time, we want to really respect the differences between employment and it becoming overly therapeutic and certainly not clinical and deficits based. So I'll go ahead and read this first one, our first vignette. Miguel holds a master's in social work and is the program director for multiple programs, including HCBS and CORE, and directly supervises 2 peer specialists. One of the peer employees, Jennifer, I guess this picture is Jennifer, recently took some PTO and voluntarily disclosed to Miguel she was dealing with some family issues at home with her teenage son, who was brought to a CPEP, a psych emergency department, and admitted to psych after a fight with her husband. The day Jennifer returns to work, Joe, a new 19-year-old program participant who was recently discharged from the hospital, is referred seeking empowerment services or peer support services. Okay, so Miguel's the supervisor. Jennifer is the peer specialist. Jennifer just dealt with some heavy stuff at home with her son, and then a participant not too far in age from her son comes in for services. So what should Miguel do? A, change assignments so the other peer specialists on the team can support Joe. Knowing Jennifer, this will hit too close to home. B, as needed, talk to Jennifer during individual supervision about how to remain curious and non-judgmental about Joe's experience and continue to provide an environment where she's empowered to share her needs for support. Okay, C, do nothing. Jennifer should be able to do her job regardless of the situation. Supervision is not the time or place to discuss personal issues or how she is impacted by her work. And D, talk in group supervision to the entire team about how being aware of our own needs and how we are affected by our work and about asking support when needed without risk of judgment. It's actually kind of tricky.
We're getting a unanimous B.
You're getting it. Okay. Okay, so that's good.
Oh, we just got one C and one D.
Okay. I think it's a little tricky because D, I think that is a great idea. We should be talking in group supervision about that. The distinction for me is I've seen sometimes where maybe a supervisor will have something individual to talk to someone about, but because maybe it's uncomfortable, they say it in a group setting and hope that person hears it. So as long as the D is part of what we're always doing, I absolutely, we should have a non-judgmental environment. Everybody should always be reminded that they can ask for support and be aware of their own needs, but it doesn't have to be targeted to the group if it's something you really want to support Jennifer with. But we also are letting Jennifer here. Jennifer knows herself. Jennifer's the best expert on herself. And if she says she's good, then she's good. Any other questions come up about this one?
I'm not seeing any questions. I'm seeing some B's and D's, some specifically B, some D. So there's a nice little thing.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, I mean, with C, it's what we do is personal, right? Like that's why this isn't always that simple, because we do talk about, we do get support from our supervisors, and who we do bring who we are into peer work. So we should be able to talk about it and get support. But I do agree, ultimately, we need to be able to do our job. But sometimes we have had situations where someone said, this is really just kicking up my stuff today. Is it possible that someone else can take it just for today? We've worked through stuff like that. But the thing there is that the peer is identifying that themselves, if that makes sense. Okay, keep going.
That last part that you said, Melissa, I think is really important, because I saw in the chat box that I believe Laura was saying that it's hard to, this is going back to the previous statement or question, but about separating personal life and work life, and struggling to be able to know when and how to do that, because sometimes the staff might come and bring up some personal stuff. And I think at the last part that Melissa just mentioned, and it's like, if the staff is doing that voluntarily, like if they're bringing it up on their own and we are allowing them to do this voluntarily, then okay, you know, that's perfectly fine, because our personal life will impact our work life. And if somebody feels so inclined to bring that up to you as a supervisor, because they're looking for some feedback or just looking for some support, then okay, that's great. And I highly encourage you to explore that and to be able to provide them some support, because clearly they might need it. But I think it more so becomes problematic when we are the ones who are trying to identify those problems and we're calling them out for it, or we are, rather than focusing on job duties and what is happening in the workplace, we're simply just, we are only trying to talk about what is happening within their home and personal life.
Thanks, Robbie. Yeah, and you know, I've spoken to a lot. I'm part of the peer community, and I'm also a supervisor, you know, and I've spoken to groups of supervisors before and groups of peers, and I've heard supervisors say that they do have peers are more frequently relapsing than other employees. You know, like these are some of the things that are driving presentations like this, because that, but I also want to acknowledge that's the experience that they're having. So they are finding that peers are burning out and peers are having challenges. So again, we want to emphasize, we're not saying that that isn't the case and that people may not need support, but the challenge is when it really becomes assumed, and we really hold the workforce down when we assume they don't have the capacity to utilize their recovery and wellness skills and teach us something. Thanks. Okay, we're ready for the second one. All right, here's our next story. So Jean holds an LMHC. She's a mental health counselor. She's a non-peer supervisor at a certified community behavioral health clinic. She's seen a recent change in a peer employee she supervises, Michael. He's been falling asleep in meetings, and coworkers are complaining about him being belligerent. Just getting into arguments. He's still providing consistent support to the community, but falling behind in his documentation. The program at the director, who's Jean's boss, tells her Michael has been, quote, acting weird, and that she is, quote, concerned the job may be too much for him. Okay, so that's our situation. We have Jean's this direct supervisor, Michael is our peer specialist, and we have our unnamed semi-clueless program director who's just not, doesn't seem to know that much about peers. So let's see. So what happens? Jean talks to Michael about what she's observed and why it's problematic, meaning she's talked to him about the documentation, about falling asleep, what's going on. Noticed you fell asleep last week or in this morning's meeting, and I'm noticing that you're getting into some arguments with folks. What's going on? And Michael tells Jean he's been getting depressed lately. So this can happen. It does happen. I've had situations where things like this have happened. I get depressed sometimes. We have employees who get depressed sometimes. Sometimes that's the word they use to describe it, and sometimes it isn't. But the important thing here is that Michael voluntarily disclosed that, and Jean didn't assume it. She didn't go to him and say, I think you're getting depressed, right? She specifically spoke to him about what was happening with his job performance and then just asked him, what's going on? So what should she do now? Now that that's what she's, now that that's what he said. So bear with me because we have a lot of choices here and there's more than one can be correct. So we're going to go through them one at a time. So A, should Jean have a supportive conversation with Michael about whether he's still seeing his therapist? B, should Jean just ask Michael directly if he's using drugs? C, should she ensure that Michael has access to guidance regarding paid time off, short-term disability, and/or reasonable accommodations as needed? D, should Jean be clear with Michael? She still needs to hold him accountable for his job performance. E, should Jean ask Michael what kind of support might be helpful? F, if it's relevant and Jean's comfortable, should she share her own experience dealing with depression and work challenges? G, should she document the conversation and schedule a follow-up? And/or H, should she talk to the program director about how the situation was handled and take an opportunity to manage up and advocate for peer employees? So now this has to be interactive. We need some ideas here, and I'm going to need some help because I can't see the chat. I don't know if okay.
So it started out where everyone was pretty strong on E being the right question. I think following some of the key points that we've been driving home. But I was really glad to see that some more answers started coming in outside of only E. So we have C, D, E, and G for a lot of the responses. I see everything but A and B. D and E, C, F, and H, C, D, E, F, G, H, C, D, E, F, G. So like there's a lot of different things that can be used.
Okay. I mean, and listen, supervision's an art, not always a science, right? So we may have different perspectives here. the way that Robbie and I looked at this, C through H, any of these actually could be really helpful. We're going to nix A and B. We don't assume someone's using just because their job description, just because their job performance is, they're having some challenges. There's really no reason to. It's disrespectful and it's discriminatory, actually, and it can be illegal. C, here's where I think it was Liz Breyer early this morning who talked about how partnering with HR is really important. We want to make sure that all employees they know what their rights are. They know they have access to time off if they need it. That if they really need to take some time and take care of themselves, it's not just if they break their ankle. If they need to take a leave to take care of their wellness, they have access to short-term disability, and they should know how to do that. And their job won't be in jeopardy for doing it. Reasonable accommodations if they need to. It could be anything. If someone's I don't know, maybe if I'm going through a medication change and it's just making it harder for me to remember things right now. I don't know. And I'm asking, could I have an extra day to do documentation? Whatever it might be. But people need to know what that process is and that they have a right to do that. For D, we do still need to hold people accountable though, right? And that's kind of how we're able to do both of those things at the same time. It's okay to be having challenges and your job's not in jeopardy and you have all of these benefits and I'm here for you. At the same time, if you're gonna be here, we need to make sure that we can get the job done. And E, we just gonna ask Michael, what kind of support do you need? Everybody got that, because Michael's the one who's gonna know that better than anyone. F, I think when Robbie and I talked about this yesterday, F can be tricky, right? Jean and it kind of depends on the relationship. Jean and Michael might have a very close and supportive relationship, and it might be natural and organic for her to say, you know what, I was dealing with something like this last year, and this is how I handled it. It might also be awkward. It might be pandering. It's not something that everybody has to do. And she might not be comfortable. That might not be something that she's used to doing. Gee, do we have to document it? Yeah, it's that stuff about supervision that can be annoying, but is it possible that, ultimately Jean is still responsible for these programs, and that's the administrative part of being a supervisor, right? She's still going to have to make sure that she can meet the needs of the program. So ultimately, if she has to, she may have to come back to it and pull out and say, remember the conversation we had, and have it written down for the both of them, right? And then last, I love in Jonathan Edwards' critical functions that advocate, that fifth column that he has there about advocating for peer employees. If the program director, the senior person there, is speaking in a disparaging way about peers, even in even casually by saying he's acting weird, it's a good idea to advocate not just for Michael, but for all of the peer workforce, because we need the help to say, actually, we're good. He absolutely can handle this job. And maybe we don't want to use words like that can sound judgmental. So that's a packed slide. There's a lot there. And any thoughts or questions about that one?
In my head, Melissa, as you were going through each one of them, I was like, that part, no, that part, that, because like everything was just like bolded and italicized in my head because it's all so relevant. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what it shows is supervision is complicated because people are complicated, right? And these kinds of things come up. And if we're experiencing each other as humans, as I love the way Robbie put that in his keynote, it can be messy, right? But if we keep all of these things in mind, it can really be supportive and beautiful. And people can have challenges and still work through things and do a great job. But same situation. How else could it have played out? Remember, all Jean said to Michael is, I'm noticing this, the documentation, the falling asleep, you got an argument, you know, what's going on? Michael said he was depressed. What else could he have said? He might have said he's confused about the new documentation process. Huh. She didn't think of that. So what could we do then? What if someone's confused about the new documentation process? How do we handle that as a supervisor?
See Jennifer put review. Manny put nothing. Review written resources for reference. Great. Review the process, etc.
We're providing a little extra support. That's workable. We can work with that. Oh, you're confused about the documentation process? Oh, I'm so glad you told me. Let's go over it again. That's him telling you he needs a little extra support and a little more education. That's what a supervisor's for. Easy. He also could have said the other team members are disrespecting him. That's why he's kind of being dismissive and behaving that way. What do we do with that? So we asked the peer specialist, what's going on? I'm seeing some changes in your job performance. And he says, like, everybody here is just treating me with disrespect.
I'm saying gather more info first, ask for examples, explore what's happening, investigate to get more info, empathize, ask open-ended questions to formulate and collaborate on a plan, and ask how would they like to be supported through it. Love that one, Megan. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. And I mean, that's Robbie, that's pretty much what you and I discussed. And I think we also said, believe him. Right? I mean, I hear what we're saying there, that we want to explore it and we want examples. And of course, we want to kind of have him talk a little bit more about that, because that can mean a lot of different things, right? But I would also just make sure we keep in mind that peer employees, particularly on when there's only one or two peers on a team, or when it's a multidisciplinary team, sometimes they are not respected, right? So we don't want to assume they're being paranoid. That's a reality, and we want to find out more about it, and if needed, do some advocacy there. What else? Michael said he's... Oh, you saw something else in there?
I saw one other thing that I also really liked, and it was talk it out with them, help connect to HR, and explain employee grievance practice. Like, there are structural things built into our organizations to support staff for this very type of instance. So I think that was great, Heather. Thank you for that.
Nice. Thank you. Okay. He's dealing with sleep apnea. That's why he's falling asleep. So that's a completely different one, right? Any thoughts on that one?
I'm not seeing any new ones come in for sleep apnea,
I mean,
but I did see one come in, another one prior, and it said I had already made the assumption that he was telling the truth. So I just wanted to shout that one out because I did.
Awesome. Thank you.
In the sleep apnea, I just see we got ask how you can support, provide EAP information, ask how we can support you, offer FMLA and EAP. Yeah,
nice.
All great
nice.
suggestions.
Nice. Yeah. And it's similar to when he said that he was dealing with depression. We want to support him. We want to know that he knows what his rights are. At the same time, we need him to not be sleeping in meetings. So let's figure this out together, right? Because that is a core part of doing the job, to be present in meetings. Oh, this is different. Michael's exhausted from his second job. I really like the idea of I threw that one in because I hear so frequently people say that so many peers only want to work part-time because they don't want to lose their disability. And there are some peer specialists for whom that's true, but if we find out someone's working a second job, interesting, maybe they're ready to go full-time. You see, like all the interesting information we might gain just by asking and not assuming that we knew, not projecting what we thought. We just open-ended question, asked Michael what was going on. Look at all this information we're getting. Another Michael in another parallel universe said he's missing his previous position. You used to have him in a different department and he preferred doing work. I don't know, let's say he liked being out in the community. He liked doing work with street outreach as opposed to now he's just in the office. Well, I never knew that. Well, we can redeploy you. Can we always do things like that? No, but it's really important information so we know where employees are coming from. And we make it safe for them to let us know what's really going on. We can't always solve the issue, but it's important to know, and it helps build that trust. So the last thing we have here is assume the best. Like none of these are excusing those behaviors. That's not what's being said there. We still have to do documentation. We need to be present in meetings, and we can't really go around, we have to be able to get along with our coworkers. But all of these responses from Michael are workable with the right supervisory response. And ultimately, when you work through issues together, which is what happens in supervision, you have a more trusting relationship and you end up with satisfied and effective peer employees who stick around, right? Because we've talked about how not only expensive is turnover, but you don't really get to build relationships with the people we support when you keep having new employees. Okay.
There's one great challenge here. Someone said, Cassandra, identify what the peer is needing. I've often had to support with shift changes for the situation. Sometimes that's available, but we don't ask, so we don't know. You know what I mean? We might not be the best at 9 o'clock.
Right. Sorry, let me get this back. So we want to end with talking about how do we avoid diagnostic overshadowing in peer supervision. And this is kind of a review of some of the things you heard here today. And some of it's a review of some of the things you've heard elsewhere in the conference, probably. But if our goal is to stay focused on strengths and be supportive, but not cross over that line where we're focusing on someone needing so much support that we're kind of being paternalistic and taking care of them. Robbie, you want to switch off maybe? You want to do number 1?
I can't see the slides, but sure.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me try again.
Sorry.
Why are you sorry?
I just wanted to alert you all. We have about 10, 12 minutes left to the session.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're on our last slide, so I think it's perfect.
All right. Perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go. Awesome. All right. So clear job descriptions. So many times peer roles they get convoluted because the job descriptions are either disregarded, or sometimes the peer supervisors don't really understand what peers do in general. So they kind of come up with their own idea, whether that is that they're coming from a clinical perspective, or they're just like, oh, okay, cool. We're just gonna feed them some random work to do. It's really, really important that the supervisors, that we are understanding what it is that peers do within their specified roles, and also that we are clearly stating on the job description, so that if by chance you have any bumps in the road along their employment, you can always revert back. Oh, this is part of your job description. This is not part of your job description. And it's also not that, the supervisor is not trying to make anyone be like, oh no, I don't want to have to be held accountable, but it's to hold you accountable so that your staff can be like, nope, I'm not doing that. That is not part of my job description. And you can't retaliate against them if they were to do that. Granted, it might not be what we all want to hear. It might not be the best, but that is a valid thing to say. and they might not be comfortable with doing something that wasn't on the job description that they applied for and got hired to do, because that might be outside of their scope of practice and or their values and principles.
And it also forces us to really think through what exactly do we need from this peer role, because all peer roles are not the same. I'm surprised sometimes. So HALI has a peer internship program, and sometimes we'll get drafts of a job description, and sometimes, not all the time, but occasionally it will really just come directly from something maybe from the certification board website. In other words, it's kind of a generic peer. And the same way there's no one social worker role, you know, like social workers do a zillion different things. It's the same thing for peers. So we really want to take time with that job description to figure out what exactly is this person going to do, and write out the policies and the procedures with them for the program so that you have something to point back to later when you're talking about job performance. Number two, keep that scheduled time. Individual supervision is not optional, and monthly is not enough. Everybody needs to have time with their supervisor, and it's so easy for there's a million things going on for things to get rescheduled, but we want to try and keep that sacred. I'm just going to do number three, because I really like this one, because sometimes it's hard to address growth areas. I'm not always comfortable with it. If we make it part, and actually Peggy Swarbrick had this in her checklist this morning, if anyone remembers that, talk about strengths and growth areas every time you meet for supervision. That's what you're doing. You're talking about, this is what's going well on both ends, and here's what we're working towards. And then it becomes easy, and then you're able to address things as they come up. And you're not like, oh, what do I do with this situation? It's just, it makes the communication that much easier.
I love that. That's my favorite one actually on here, the addressing strengths and growth. I think it's also, it helps it to create that structure you were saying, Melissa. And then I'll say for me personally, sometimes I'll go into supervision, or in the past I've gone to supervision, and my supervisor would just talk about themselves, or they would talk to each other about their own lives. And it's like, wait, I haven't seen y'all in like a month. I got a lot going on. I have some things I need approval on. Can we get back to business?
Right,
so I think
right.
having like a set schedule for our supervisory, I'm totally blanking on the word I was looking for, and I'm never going to try to find it right now.
Okay.
I did see in the chat box.
It's late.
Yeah,
Right.
somebody asked, what is the, oh no, the more came in. But from what I'm remembering, they were asking, what is like the opportune time for, like, how many times should they meet with a supervisor or a supervisee? Personally, I think at minimum, bi-weekly. I think depending on your schedules, if you can only fit in once monthly, okay, but try and fit in some other ones throughout that month. But I would really strive for at minimum bi-weekly. And if you have the capability, maybe you do like a bi-weekly individual and bi-weekly group supervision, or, bi-weekly individual, one-time monthly group supervision, or like vice versa. But I think it's having, yeah, that's my answer. Sorry, Melissa, you can disagree.
That's okay. I think it's a great answer. 4 and 5 kind of go together, right? We talked about, don't assume, don't project. You don't necessarily know what's going on. Just ask. People are the experts on themselves. But if you're going to assume potential, assume capabilities, provide opportunities for improvement. One thing that's unique about all the great opportunities I've had over the past 10 years in this field is I was not ready for any of them. And somebody gave me an opportunity to rise to expectations. And it's amazing what happens when we do that, when we provide the opportunity for people to improve and for people to grow, and we provide the training tools that they need and the support. It's really incredible what happens with people. And this peer workforce needs more leaders. So we want to all be doing that together, really. We put here again co-supervision with a more experienced or skilled peer. it's a great tool. More organizations we're seeing are doing it. It's hard enough to do clinical work. Everybody, staffing is hard everywhere. Not everybody, it's great to go through the Academy of Peer Services and go to the trainings, and it's great that everyone's here, but we also all don't have to be experts on everything. And it can really be helpful to a peer to also have a co-supervisor. It doesn't mean that they're talking about their administrative or task supervisor. There's a really nice way that it can work collaboratively. And there's also ways to contract for group supervision, like reflective practice for for people who practice peer support is extremely important. And if people don't have an opportunity to do that at their home agency, there are opportunities to do it elsewhere. And some of those happen at conferences. So number 7, continuing education specifically for peers. Sometimes I'm surprised at the number of working peers who don't either know about or have the opportunity to attend some of the trainings and conferences that are designed specifically for peers. And I'm not even sure how we would do work without offering that. So it's not only making employees aware, but giving them the time and paying for the training and the education and paying them for their time to do that. And I put it in here again, number 8, because it's so important for people to be able to take advantage of these if they need to. People have their time off, and that's theirs to take if they need it. Temporary disability, people can take time off to take care of themselves, and we hold their job until they come back. It's no different than if they had regardless of what's going on. If people need some time to go deal with a mental health challenge, that's perfectly fine. Reasonable accommodations. Evaluation. It's really important that everybody get to be evaluated, and being evaluated doesn't have to be scary, right? It's just finding out what's going well and what are the areas where I need to grow, because that's how people grow. And nothing in that evaluation really should be, if you do it annually, nothing really should be a huge surprise, because you're talking about it every week in supervision, number 3, right? It's just where, excuse me, that's where you document it. And then the last thing here, we didn't really talk about this, but progressive coaching. We're not using the term progressive discipline here, which is what you may know it as. It's kind of the same process probably, but it's to us, this is really an important term switch, because it switches what you're doing with it. It's not to get people, you're not punishing them for not getting it right. You're pointing out, remember, this was the job description, this is what we talked about. Here's the gap. Here's how we're going to support you in getting where you want to be and where we need you to be. And it's a process that works. It's not progressive coaching is not, it gets a bad rap, I think. I think sometimes when people hear about that type of process, they think this is how people document when they're getting ready to let someone go. And that's not really how it should be used. Ultimately, the best way to use progressive coaching is that we document any challenges that we're having together, and then things get better, and then this goes away.
Well, so that was all perfect. Thank you so much. I do realize that we only have like less than 2 minutes left,
Yeah.
but I did see 2 really great comments in here. And Miriam, I wasn't sure if you had any other comments that you were taking note of. But one, I saw that Kristen Rivera put, I wonder if job descriptions could refer to the code of ethics of YPAs and, other peer roles alike. Absolutely. I love that idea. I know 2 programs here on Long Island specifically that have started doing that. So Hope for Youth and Sagamore Children's Hospital have included and incorporated the YPA Code of Ethics into their job descriptions, which is amazing. And they did that because they collaborated with YPAs themselves rather than doing it themselves from a very clinical perspective, which is amazing. So great, Kristen. And I see a lot of other comments going on below that, like feeding into it. I love seeing that. So thank you. One other question came in, and I think there might have been more, but one that I want to ask you, Melissa, because of your expertise. Where'd it go?
I love that idea too. Actually, I'm going to steal that, the code of ethics. Not necessarily include the whole thing, but I love referencing it in the job descriptions because we actually don't do that. So thanks for that.
Okay, so Jean put, how do you build awareness in an agency that is being stigmatizing?
In other words, where the peers there are being stigmatized.
That's what I'm reading it as too, yeah. Jean, you can correct us if we're reading it wrong.
Yeah.
Jean says yes.
Well, there are a number of resources there's enough now, and there's enough guidance, I think, coming out of OMH. So much more even than there was 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, that there are some, I saw this, I wondered if you might be interested in it. You know, like I've known some peers who have done that, even with conferences like this. There's also ways to get support from other peers and talk that through. Ultimately, if stigma is veering into discrimination, you may have a case, right? And I don't want to, but sometimes I've spoken to peers who have talked to me about the circumstances under which they've left their positions in the past. And I've thought, yikes, that agency had a lawsuit on their hands. So if you really think you're being discriminated against, that's something to keep in mind. If it just feels like an environment where you're not valued, I guess the best thing I can say is there's enough organizations now who get it. Go somewhere where you are valued. I mean, one thing we have going for us as peers now is the demand has skyrocketed, right? 10 years ago or so, it was actually, even then, it was I remember presenting when we first opened a peer respite down here on Long Island, and people were like, wait, what? They still didn't get it. Now everyone gets it. Everybody needs peers. So you have the advantage there.
All right. I want to thank you both for an amazing, amazing, and amazing presentation. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Melissa, for this informative, inspirational, and powerful and uplifting presentation. It's been all of those things, so much more. Thank you to the sponsors at OMH, our partners at the Alliance of Rights and Recovery. And thank you to all of you, the participants, who took time out of your busy day to attend this session. I want to remind you, in order to earn CE credits for your participation, you must complete the workshop evaluation that you receive by email from the Alliance within 48 hours. This session is worth 1.2 credits as a workshop. To access the next session, well, actually, it is the wrap up. Click on the title, the link in the final.
It's here.
Yep.
It's
Oh,
here.
it's here. So stay
Everyone
here.
is joining right now. This is the wrap.
Stay here. Okay. A recording of this session is expected to be available within 30 days of the PeerTAC website. I put that in the chat. Thank you for your participation in this inaugural PeerTAC Supervision Summit. We hope to see you again next year.